Firstly, I would like to pay my respects to the First Nations people of all of Australia lands, of our past and our present, and for our future. And I'd like to thank you for interviewing me today. And my name is Aunty Teresa, Clancy Power, and I'm a Waka Waka woman.
Yuwangan Yawa Numbali, Marumba Beran, Yagarajarana, Gaja, Kerry, Yari, Nya, Yagara, Jara. Friendly greetings all from Yagara country. I am Gaja, Kerry, Charlton.
Hello everybody, my name's Stephen Coghill. I'm part of the Yagara people of this area. I'm a traditional owner. Our area goes from Stradbroke Island, west over to the Toowoomba Ranges, north to the South Pine River and south to the Logan. So that's our areas, 8 clans in there. And I'd just like to say a welcome to country for the people who are watching this program at the moment. And welcome Yawa Yuwangan, which is hello to you all. And yeah.
Hello, my name is Stephen Bond. I'm direct descendant of the Waka Waka people. I also play the didgeridoo. I'm a bit of an artist too, so I'd like to express a lot of my talent through my artwork.
The conversation about the history of Benarrawa starts in the early 90s, around 92, 93. And it follows maybe 8 or 10 years of intentional practice in this area, particularly around the graceful Christ the King Catholic parish, where families had approached the school, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families in the southern part of the city, had approached the school about being included and an intentional program happening. A lot of passion and commitment in the local community had generated in result to that. But people were aware that we had the benefit of, say, a couple of parish priests in a row who were very committed to that. But you couldn't assume that was always going to continue. And there was a degree of ownership beyond the Catholic parish in the locality about that. So people started to think, well, what could we do, what should we do to sustain that engagement? And where it went to was, well, we could try and capture some of that work and some of that practice within a community organisation and call it Benarrawa. That organisation was not an organisation for and about Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people, but was inclusive of that. And it did a range of things. So it had a small amount of resources and it established itself as an incorporated association. So it was independent and even more inclusive than going beyond the parish. There were some interesting steps in that process, notably the name. At the time, because there was a government funding involved, there was some encouragement from state government that you had a sensible name like Inner South West Suburbs Community Development Association. And that was all the rage at the time, was to use geography in the name of your organisation. So there was some fairly intense conversations because we'd stumbled across and discovered that the watercourse of the Oxley Creek was Benarrawa. And that locality and the land around it was, the naming of it was still available in terms of Indigenous people. So we went about a process of consulting the custodian of language at the time, who was Uncle Neville Bonner, a notable Australian, Indigenous Australian, Australia's first senator, Indigenous senator. We got his permission, and then we got the permission of the Brisbane Council Elders. So we proceeded to adopt that name. I think, 30 years later, I'm not sure if we'd still be here if we'd had a sensible name like Inner South Perth Suburbs Community Development Association. I think we might have been probably subsumed into a larger organisation, and we wouldn't be the unique, unusual, rather precious entity that does all sorts of good community development work, but has had about 30 years of intentional connection with First Peoples.
I probably got to know about, prior to it becoming Benarrawa, because my children went to Christ the King school, and they had a high Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander student population there. I was involved with some of the activities happening there and on the ASPEC committee, which was the Aboriginal education funding grant at the time. It was probably 7 or 8 years ago when I was approached to do some workshops in the schools, and began working in reconciliation activities with Benarrawa, cultural sharing, cultural awareness, cultural training. Sometimes I would teach them a bit of song and dance, culture, culture sharing, and I have a teaching background as well, so I do particular lessons with them as well, so develop some activity sheets. And at the time I started working with the Benarrawa and the activities, I was only in my 30s, early 30s. So all the elders, the older generation, my mother's generation, were all the elders. So those elders then, they were strong elders in that they'd come through the government administration, the mission system, the segregation. They'd come through that.
I did my 4th social work placement at Benarrawa. It at that stage was at Christ the King Parish in the Community Development Office. It had already adopted, with the permission of Uncle Neville Bonner, the name Benarrawa. And during that time, I had lots of opportunities of meeting with First Nations people. But because the school had had an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultural program at Christ the King Catholic Parish, I was able to talk to the cultural worker there, meet the parents whose children were at school, and I was sometimes invited to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander parent support group for a chat. So other things that then started to happen were that Oxley Creek Environment Group asked us to be part of the Oxley Creek Festival. I think Uncle Stephen Bond asked someone to make a bark canoe modelled on the Aboriginal canoe, and Thomas Coghill, one of the Coghill boys, it was towed part of the way into the river, and then one of the Coghill young men paddled it to the pontoon at Oxley Creek, and Aunty Vi McDermott came in the canoe, and until the day she died, she would tell that story of how brave she was coming in the canoe and stepping onto the pontoon at Oxley Creek, at the mouth of Oxley Creek. So from that water festival, I guess the group also benefited by the continued interest, and so involvement, especially in our community events, developed and grew. In 1997, I was successful in becoming a community development worker at Benarrawa, and we had divvied up our workload. So one of my principal pieces of work was to work with the Benarrawa Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders Solidarity Group.
In that period, around sort of 93 to 95, there was a need to put the resources that were available for community development, some government funding, in this region into Benarrawa so that could be sustained and secured. But the intention of calling it Benarrawa and thinking about the locality and thinking about some of the history of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people being engaged in one of the local schools was a very strong influence that the association would be open and committed and thoughtful and try to learn how to have a richer connection with First Peoples and country. And some of the chicken and the egg was that in 1993 was the United Nations International Year of Indigenous People. And the Commonwealth Government provided a kind of a community education resource called study circles, reconciliation study circles. It was a self-directed sort of community learning process. So the Benarrawa invited local people from the district to participate in a discussion group and think about, well, how can we make a difference? How come we can move to reconciliation? Now, that was a positive experience for the participants. There was probably about a dozen people, and a core of them said we would like to establish a solidarity group to engage with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people on an ongoing basis and continue to educate ourselves and become more culturally aware. So that became a core group in Benarrawa. It wasn't Benarrawa, but it was a core group of Benarrawa. And that still exists. It has gone on continuously for 30 years. And now, ever so slowly and ever so much through relationships, it has a strong profile, particularly amongst Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders in southeast Queensland. So from a very small base, it has quite a large profile and has a lot of credibility with elders. And, and that's not just old people because, emerging elders. So there would be second generation families who have known about Benarrawa and the Solidarity Group and has come along as children and participated in activities. And now they're adults and elders.
I like getting involved in things because when you do get involved, everyone's got a little bit more to give. And sometimes there's things that you want to put into place and you don't think of a certain thing and someone else comes up with that idea and you think, oh, that's a great idea. Us having the group, they've helped me, but I've helped them. Benarrawa has grown more. In the time that I've been coming here to meetings, it's just got bigger and bigger. The last meeting I came here that we had, this whole room was full of new people wanting to join. And that's just so mind-blowing. That's what I can see all the changes. These people aren't just coming because they're trying to tick a box. They're coming because they care.
I first became aware of Benarrawa through my cousin, sister Kerry, who's been involved with Benarrawa for quite a while. And she introduced me to the Sorry Day event that Benarrawa was facilitating. Other things I became aware of that Benarrawa does in support of Indigenous people, Aboriginal people and traditional owner people, Torres Strait Islander people. There's a solidarity group that, supports different aspects of Indigenous social life, political life, and even to some extent some economic development with Aboriginal groups. I became aware of this over the period, not all in one hit, and so I thought, good organisation to be networked with. A lot of their projects are basically human rights stuff that I get involved with, and those human rights include Indigenous human rights, Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander human rights awareness, social impacts, political impacts on the Indigenous community, where I've been able to speak into and help to give a view of how some Indigenous people are responding to today's issues. The Voice, for instance, the treaty, what's happening with that, the Uluru Statement of the Heart. I'm happy to join in with conversation with Benarrawa. Not that they ask specifically about that, but they do like to know what Indigenous people are talking about on those issues. We've got a new organisation called Yuggera Mugginjin Aboriginal Corporation. They're elders of this group. We interact with Benarrawa significantly. WIMAC is a cultural organisation. It's involved with language and teaching that within the schools around here in Yuggera, and also works in with, while we're still two separate entities, we work together. Benarrawa and WIMAC work together.
I've been with Benarrawa for quite a few years now, and I just love being with the people. They are just so friendly. And the strangest thing is, it's not strange, but there's no Aboriginals running it. They're all non-Indigenous people, and that shows they care. So they're wanting to work and support us. And that's what I find so heartwarming. And that's what we need to close the gap. And this is a way, for me, that I can see in closing the gap.
Benarrawa is not just the workers, and so the Benarrawa Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Solidarity Group is owned by the people that are a part of it. And it has some fabulous and phenomenal people as parts of that solidarity group. It's also had people who may never have thought that they would end up in a space like that. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander solidarity was not their thing, but through relationship with an Indigenous person and through participation in this space, it became a thing that was of importance to them. And I think that relationship has been incredibly important in carrying that through. When I came on board, there was quite a strong there was already quite a strong energy around that space, and there were really sort of clear things that solidarity group was already sort of wanting to work on and achieve. And so some of it was really just coming on board and supporting that work to continue. So the Sorry Day ceremonies, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Art Show and Cultural Festival, the Elders Lunch, that sort of thing were kind of really... They were things that were in the calendar that were just a part of the life of this place.
At Benarrawa and in the Solidarity Group, part of our main purpose at that time was to educate ourselves and the wider community, to build relationships with Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people, and to continue to learn. It's always been a goal of that group. So part of that was to take some Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander workshops, particularly around the first Sorry Day, and that work started back in 1997. The first Sorry Day was the following year in March. And of course, the reason for the first Sorry Day was the release of the national inquiry into the removal of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander children from their families and communities. Alderman Jim Sawley was the Lord Mayor at the time, so he decided he would invite people from the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community in to work with him. The Brisbane Council of Elders and Queensland churches together. Uncle Stephen Mam was part of that group, and he had children at Christ the King School. He and Aunty Pam Mam had children at Christ the King School. So having the opportunity, Council then appointed an Aboriginal worker to work with her around developing local Sorry Day ceremonies. The Sherwood area, Sherwood Arboretum, was chosen because there had been a hostel for Aboriginal women, and there was also a home at Yeronga that had housed young men. I felt very privileged to do that work because I learnt so much at that time. And of course, the first Sorry Day was an amazing ceremony at the Arboretum. We've been fortunate over successive years of doing Sorry Day every year to have different elders who were removed come and work with us and become part of the solidarity group at Benarrawa.
I was actually adopted when I was nearly 8, and beautiful people. I was very, very lucky, because a lot of children that were adopted out, you know, some of them ended up back in the homes and things again. It just didn't work out. But I didn't know I was Aboriginal. So when we were in dorms, I mean, we couldn't understand why we weren't with our family. Didn't our family want us anymore? What did we do wrong? Where was our mum? Why isn't mum coming getting us? I was in my 30s when I got told I'm Aboriginal, and I got called by a company called Link Up, and they explained when they came out to see me that the government had to release where all the children were taken, and they had to release the information. And that's when I was informed I was Aboriginal. And that was like something that just hit you in the face, you know. It wasn't because of the word Aboriginal. It was like you thought you knew who you were because you finally grew up with a couple of people that loved you, and you're in your 30s and you're happy going on with your life, not thinking that this isn't who you think you are. And all of a sudden someone's telling you, you've got another family, you've got other siblings, and you're Aboriginal. And it's like, whoa. It was exciting and it was scary. Yes, I wanted to know who my birth parents were. And I wanted to know my siblings. But as I went on my journey, I got to know the culture more, because that's The culture actually became my family. I grabbed onto the culture after being knocked so many times, but I've never found them. I've found lots and lots of cousins, but as I said, the culture to me and who I meet on the way and everything, that's who my family is, and I'm happy with that. To be able to be part of the stolen generation and to be a voice for the ones that I know that didn't make it, that were with me at the time, I can tell the truth on what happened. And the people do need to know the truth of what happened. It's not your fault. It's nobody. You can't blame people nowadays what happened, but the truth needs to be told. And you can't hide behind it anymore, you know. And I'm just so privileged to be one of the stolen generations that made it and is able to have that voice for the ones that didn't make it and let known the truth.
Every year the participants of our Sorry Day commemoration ceremony is growing, and so we also have wider circles involved from the wider community and the schools and students and young people and older people, and that's important. So since I've been involved, children are now parents and grandparents, you know, and so they're still coming to it. So it's life-giving and giving hope to others who are also involved and want to be involved. For me, I see that it's this sort of work where I won't sugarcoat anything. We still suffer racism greatly in the country. We still have the highest morbidity rates in particular, you know, across most spectrums of our health, the high incarceration rates of our youth, the high levels of detention, the increasing numbers of women, and also the continued high profiling and incarceration of Aboriginal men. So so I'm committed to be a part of the change for the better.
Closing the gap for me is Kevin Rudd. When that first started, Kevin Rudd did the apology that stolen generation, it did happen. In Kevin Rudd's eyes, I was down there for that because I am part of the stolen generation. It was phenomenal. And yes, I thought, like Kevin Rudd, that was going to be the start of us starting to move closer together. But it didn't happen. And what I've noticed in the time I've been with Benarrawa is the gaps are closing bit by bit. We've got a long way to go, and the unfortunate part of our culture, it'll never be a complete culture. Our culture's going to still have fractures in it, and that's the saddest part, because being part of the stolen generation, my name was changed 7 times. My identity's taken. My language is taken. They'll never come back. And I can't teach my language because I don't know my language. The language I'm learning that I'm speaking to you today is my second language. My actual language, I don't know it. So there's so much I can teach the children of the culture, but there's so much I can't teach them. On Sorry Day, it used to be a small little group. I was even happy with that because the people that turned up, I thought, that's wonderful. Thank you for coming and thank you for supporting. Now it's so many schools and so many people, and it's just got bigger and bigger. I don't even know what this year's going to bring, because every year is doing now, it's just huge. And that just shows how many people are walking beside you.
A lot of the good work that Benarrawa has done around Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander stuff through the Solidarity Group is with local schools and connecting with teachers. So there's an educators circle. And, for example, on Sorry Day each year, which is held in the Sherwood Arboretum, when it was first acknowledged, and we would meet at 7 o'clock in the morning on the 26th of May, there would people be my age and older who would be attending. But because of the profile of Benarrawa amongst the schools in the wider district, every year there are more and more young people at that ceremony at 7 o'clock in the morning in groups in their school uniforms. So there's a whole generation of young people who are growing up that probably couldn't care less what the details about Benarrawa are, but they know it's a constant in their community. And in gentle ways, maybe ways they don't realise, it's influenced their formation and the development of their values in cooperation with their school communities.
It's by talking about these things that people begin to learn more. And that's the other exciting thing that developed in 2017, the Educators Learning Circle, that's often resourced by elders to support teachers as they teach more about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture in their schools, because they feel inhibited at first. They don't know exactly what to teach or how to do it. But with the support of that group, and perhaps with being able to access some Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultural workers, they can move forward with that program in their schools. And that group meets quarterly at Benarrawa.
One of the programs here that we realised from me going into the schools, and John, one of the workers, John Morm, who I was working with on that project, we started having conversations about how could we make it more energy economically, how to use that to get to more, but with less running around to 15 schools. So we've tossed around the idea of bringing a group together, and so that's where the educator learning circles comes from. The educators learning culture yarning circles, which happens once a term, and they can have a representation of teachers from many schools in the area, and they also get, there's the communications that go out and resources, etc. that way.
I have seen in the time that I've been with Benarrawa things coming together, not so far gapped. It's a lot of closure, schools opening up. Teachers are I'm coming here through next week, and there's a mob of teachers coming here, and they're going to be talking to me about the culture, so they can get me to come into the schools to help them with the children for the culture and the understanding of it, instead of coming out of books.
Probably around the same time as the first Sorry Day, we started doing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander art shows and cultural festivals. First of all with Milpera, and then we moved to include other schools in the area. Stephen Bond teaching people how to paint boomerangs and how to do dot painting, Indigenous painting. We had people come and show us how to do ochre face painting and talk to us about the importance of how the dancers dance, how some of the people dress and so forth. So it was a great accelerated time of learning, and because other schools wanted to know more, we started to do more referrals for Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander culture and crafts workers. We also were asked by local libraries from here to Mount Cooghill to have local displays in their libraries. So it gave our work a great deal of impetus, and we also became known in the area. Stephen Bond often, I think after probably about 2 trades and cultural festivals, started doing paintings that were auctioned at the festival, and the proceeds would go to usually an Indigenous organisation, though once he supported Pamphlet Bridge Sea Scouts to actually be able to buy a canoe for that.
I think the stuff that really, really excited me, particularly around things like the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Art Show and Cultural Festival, which was a partnership with Milperra State High School. So for people who don't know, Milperra State High School is a high school that supports young people arriving in Australia really through their first months, and that can be extended as they develop the English skills to be able to move into mainstream schools. It's a place where they can kind of start to get a sense of how the education system functions here in Australia. And then sometimes we'd bring together Milperra and a local primary school and an elder to sort of have workshops together. And it was really, again, about supporting those different parts of Australia, of our community, to kind of come together and start to build connection and engagement and understanding with each other. And I think for me that idea around the oldest Australians and the newest Australians coming together is a really powerful, powerful piece.
Well, Benarrawa, a good friend of mine, Sarah Boyne, invited me down and said, they're looking to do an Indigenous art show and culture festival. I sort of come along on the very first one and sort of put a bit of work in and got invited to Benarrawa to work on the steering committee to assist with the artists, introduce Indigenous artists to the festival, but also have that Indigenous input towards what was going on. It started off slow. We ended up with probably about 5 or 10 artists in the first couple of shows. But there was a lot of art, so some artists would show up with 5, 10, 15, 20 paintings. But once word got around, we were looking at something like 70 different artists who was putting their artwork in, So we went from virtually 2 classrooms to 5 classrooms in, something like 200 paintings hanging on the walls. I did a few didgeridoo workshops with the school as a lead up towards the art exhibition. So I'd come in and do a bit of a demonstration for the kids. Also sit there and talk to them about it, but also give them an idea of it and also a bit of a muck around with it, because we had a few different didgeridoos that I brought along on the day. And then on the Saturday of the art exhibition, I used to run the boomerang painting workshop. So the kids would come in and we used to buy these $2 plywood boomerangs, and then they'd paint it and then, run around thinking that they were these good artists, and they'd have them hanging up, and it was good. Well, Benarrawa introduces you to different cultures, different, lines of people, you'd never meet in a general day out, day in sort of thing, And also some local businesses. There was a company that would frame the paintings. I've sold paintings to the guy who framed the paintings that was hanging, you know. So little things like that, sort of what Benarrawa sort of brought me closer to it.
We started having Invasion Day ceremonies in the mid-2000s.
We talked about doing something on Invasion Day, coming together as some sort of reflection. A group of people, and almost lest we forget moment. And when we first talked about it, it was sort of like just a small group of people in the solidarity group. And we were sort of like, oh, well, you know, it's an event. Should we advertise it? Do we need to put it into the local newspaper? Should we get flyers out? And the response was, let's just do it. There was this sense that we wanted to do something on the morning of Australia Day, because at that time Australia Day was still very... The discourse around Australia Day was still very much taken up in this kind of jingoistic space. We also contacted Uncle Sam Watson, who we lost last year, and said, look, we're just a local group of people. We want to do this thing. We're aware that the Invasion Day rally happens in the middle of that day. This is not an alternative to that. We just wanted to, I guess, check in with you as a protocol and say, is it okay if we do this thing just as a local thing? And he was very encouraging of that. It was very, very simple, and we just, we read some of the history of this local area that's contained in the local Aboriginal Indigenous history book that Gaja Kerry was involved with writing. I think we had a minute's silence to kind of recognise what that day of invasion means. So 26th of January.
I suppose that number of people grew and in volume, so we eventually moved to the mouth of Oxley Creek. Council had commissioned someone to build a bronze canoe, which was eventually put at the mouth of Oxley Creek. After that canoe went into place, probably in the early 2010s, we would certainly gather there, put flowers in the canoe on Survival. We changed the name from Invasion Day to Survival Day because that's what the elders wanted us to remember, that they had survived the coming of the colonials, the white fellas, the removal from their communities, often from their families, often from their traditional country, the loss of language, and really many other successive dispossessions, but they had survived and their culture was still surviving.
So last year I went to that event and there were 350 people there. And I think over the years that event has grown not because, not because we did great marketing, but I think because the momentum in that space has grown and people who might not otherwise have considered themselves to be active in that space are looking for ways to be active in that space and are looking for ways for their kids to, be learning about those things. And I think it's grown through relationship, and I think, relationship with local schools and relationship with other local organisations. And it's grown because there is a momentum that's growing. The moments where people come together and have cuppas and build relationship and have those really beautiful engagements like with the Elders Lunch, but it's also continuing to face the complexity of this space and being willing to keep journeying with that and recognising that this stuff is so very real. We're not talking about a history. We're talking about a now where this, these things are still played out. The impacts on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's lives are still very much played out today. So
there's sort of certain principles and values behind our work. But you need support from your local community, and that comes through, volunteering and things like that. But there's a pragmatic side where you need a place and this place belongs to the Brisbane City Council, and there's a long story with that. And you need some funding to pay for some staff, even though they're minimal, and that comes from the state government. Now, those relationships with those two entities have gone on for decades now. And in there requires a lot of skill, particularly from the workers, and the management committee made up of, local people who volunteer. And some people come from outside the district because they're committed to what it does. They're not necessarily always local. And that's not easy because grant and government funding expectations and lots of regulations in local government can be quite constraining because they've got their own agendas which need to be respected. Sure, stick to your guns, be consistent, uphold your values, but do it calmly and consistently and maybe stubbornly, but maintain the reputation that it's a reasonable group of people. They have a history that when we listen to them, they are flexible. And when you have a difficult person or persons or a change of government or administration, write it out. Take a First Peoples view. Take the longer view.
That painting there, which is the story of Benarrawa, and the story of Benarrawa, and that was a painting done by Ravina Waldron's cousin, John Tatton, and it tells the story of Benarrawa. And so that's a blueprint of principles and values and practice for Benarrawa as well. So that continually gets reflected back into the group.
Benarrawa would be what I would call, for me, the mother. And she's got the arms extending. And you've got all these people that work in there that are walking with us. And that's a mighty feeling. It's a very proud feeling for me. I'm just so grateful that I got them walking beside me. But not only that, they're my friends. And their care. They're not doing it for the money, because Benarrawa, when they were starting out, there was no money. But they were here doing the work. That speaks for itself. And I meet so many wonderful people, and I've made so many great friends that even if they may have left Benarrawa, or they may have left a school, they were a teacher but they've gone to some other school, I've got their phone numbers, they got mine, we're connecting still. That's the bond. You've worked together but you've formed a beautiful friendship.
I think it's about people, it's about relationship, it's about the stickety-withedness. And I think it's because there are relationships with elders and community members that you can walk away from a volunteer position, but you don't walk away from relationships.
Well, from my perspective, as from an Aboriginal perspective, an Indigenous perspective, Benarrawa seems to be on the front foot with issues. Well, it is on the front foot with issues. So any new issues that, present itself, Benarrawa seems to get involvement with that, with the solidarity group, with the Indigenous members as part of that solidarity group. And it's not, it's social justice that I like about Benarrawa. The people in it are fair income and genuine, and they really seek your opinion. I believe it goes beyond professionalism. I think they're personally, involved with it, with people I've met around here, and non-Indigenous people, I believe that they have a personal interest in the social justice within this country. And that warms the cockles of my heart every time, when I can find that in an organisation. Like I've worked in places that says we're this, that and that, and proactive in Aboriginal this and Aboriginal that, and you get to the workplace and it's like eating cardboard. It's just bland. So I've found that different with Benarrawa. I believe that they're genuine and seeking social justice for whoever, whether it's, poor white people in a nala, poor Aboriginal people in a nala, and they keep consulting with the community, whichever demographic of the community that's involved with, they'll consult with them to find, what is the truth, what's happening, what needs to be done, and how they can address some of those issues.
And I think that with whatever cultural group you are, if you meet people whose heart is right and talk, they're doing things because it's the right heart motive, you're not going to, growl at them, but you'll guide them. Let's say you'll return to the table rather than close the door and say that ignorant, I'm not going to need that ignorant sort of. So I think that our people could see the heart of, and the Benarrawa people, it certainly touched their heart. There are all these markers that show that there's changes happening, that hope, we hope, it's human nature to hope, and seeing that Benarrawa continues to stay true to the original vision and, which is a reconciled and healed country with the First Nations people, and seeking to grow understandings, build bridges, and also for equity for our people.
Benarrawa's given me that opportunity to share my culture, to share my knowledge, share my artwork, but also share with people things that they probably would never seen. Like my didgeridoo playing, every time I play the didgeridoo, someone will come up and say, I've never seen it that way, I've never heard it that way. Or the paintings, how did you do that? Why did you use these colours? I like that sort of feedback, and Benarrawa's sort of giving me that opportunity.
Probably most people in the district wouldn't even know where the Benarrawa house is unless they drove past it. But I think because it's been around for a long time, for 30 years now, with a prehistory of about 10, with particularly around engagement with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, it's got a reputation. It's been a constant. So it's quite well known, as we've talked about before, amongst Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community, particularly elders. It's quite well known in the community development sector because it's seen to be a rather unusual, in a positive way, micro community organisation. And it's got a reputation for quality practice. It's been very fortunate. It has a series of very exceptional practitioners, workers, who've all worked part-time, so it's not like they had a lot of resources. But they've been very fine humans and very good practitioners. So it's got known by reputation. Our intention to, with permission, adopt an Indigenous name as our identity has given us a sort of spirit and identity and a pathway into respecting and engaging with our local country. I think that energy has grown gradually, and the work of Benarrawa is actually tied to the land of Benarrawa. And it is a physically very beautiful area, so it's fairly easy to be enchanted and be cared for by it. There's lovely waterways and lots of open space.
I really hope Benarrawa will continue to do this work for many years to come,